Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining our tips and tricks for VMware Cloud on AWS today, focusing on VCDR's DR plans. My name is Jason Grierson. I'm a staff customer success architect on the multi-cloud team, and my partner Bilal is on the same team. Unfortunately, he had an emergency come up. He's going to try and make it. If he doesn't, I'll be your only speaker for today. So hopefully he pops in, but if not, he was a great help in putting this together today. With that, we have a pretty tight packed 30 minutes, so let's jump right in. And we're going to start with a couple polls just to get some interaction out of the group and see where everyone's fallen in their experience. The first poll here is, if you've had a disaster recovery situation, did your disaster recovery go according to plan? Now, this is a safe environment. It's an anonymous vote, so feel free to be candid with it. I'll read out the questions here, and by the time I'm done reading the questions, we'll give it a couple more seconds and we'll pull that poll. First one is yes, I had no issues, everything went swimmingly. Second one is somewhat went okay, ran into some odd issues, but mostly smooth. Third one was we lost some hair, but we got it working. And almost the last one was, what DR plan? I just updated my resume and kind of whimpered in the corner. Or maybe it was a mixture of somebody, between these, so other, or something along those lines. So feel free to partake in that, and we'll give her a couple more seconds here, and we'll let the moderators pull the poll shortly. Perfect. Okay, so we got some statistics here. So we got 25% sitting at somewhat, ran into some odd issues, but mostly went smoothly. And then, what DR plan? I updated my resume. We got someone out there that was in that situation. And we got 25%. We got two other ones there. So maybe there was a situation. But oddly enough, we had 0% on, everything went swimmingly. So clearly everyone's kind of had similar experiences. So that's great. Thanks for participating in that. So with that said, the last poll here is just to help us build out future material. We're talking about DR plans today and execution runbooks, those sorts of things. But what would you like to see future conversations about? The high level and technical pieces of what makes VCDR tick, more about protection groups. They're a pretty large part of VCDR and your disaster recovery, a deeper dive into DR plans if there's something that's just not covered today. Or how does VCDR protect against ransomware, or our favorite topic, disaster recovery networking, because it's always networking. That's the trouble part, right? Or other, maybe there's something we missed on the list here and you'd like to see something else. So we'll give the moderators a couple seconds, some time, and then we'll pull those statistics and we'll see where we fall from a group's perspective. All right, so we got some high level, we got 67% sitting at high level architecture and setup, or more information of what makes that tick. We got some for more in depth DR plans, and then networking. That's, no surprise there. So we'll let the moderators run with that, and we'll see what future sessions we can get. Moving forward, jumping into our agenda. So we are going to cover some of those. So high level architecture will be covered today. Just to level set everyone in the group as we talk about the different pieces. Then we'll be talking about on-demand versus pilot light, what is involved with an on-demand setup, because there's some extra foundational work that needs to take place there for when you do have to do recovery. And then all the goodness of creating DR plans. So the mappings, creating your VM recovery orders, what's the difference between a test plan versus failover, and the different storage subsystems you can pick during the DR plan. And then of course, all the steps that goes into those recovery steps. So with that, we'll jump right in. So from a high levels perspective, this is kind of like a 10,000 foot view. And in future sessions, if we want to kind of really get into the nitty gritty in it, we can definitely schedule that for a different session. But the high level is you have a protected site, and this can be on-prem, or this can be another VMC on AWS region or software defined data center. And we essentially install a small VM called a DRAS connector. And this little VM is a connector that connects to VCDR's cloud-based services and realistically talks to the SaaS orchestrator and the scale-out file system. The SaaS orchestrator is pretty much what it sounds like. It's our orchestrator and automation tool. It's the engine that kind of pushes and pulls and does a lot of the magic. And then the scale out file system is actually broken out into two pieces. The data is actually stored in an S3 bucket. And then the scale out file system is a little wedge that sits in front of the S3 bucket that translates the S3 storage into an NFS share that we can then mount to your VMC software-defined clusters, in the regions that you like. So that's kind of how we get there. And this is how we get away with on-demand, which we'll talk about shortly here, is we replicate all of the VMs up into this scale-out file system in the cloud, which makes it so we don't necessarily need the other side on the fence unless a recovery is required. So that's kind of the high-level look at what, how that works. And at the end of the session, we got some time for extra questions. So if you want to dive into that, by all means, we can jump in there. So something that comes up a lot is when you are working with a product, if you do bump into any issues, the first thing that happens when you call support is send me the logs or support bundle. And this is just a little nugget that I wanted to sneak in here just because they kind of hide it in the UI a little bit. And, so if you open up a support ticket and they want a support bundle, we make it very easy. You just go into the VCDR UI, you click on your protected site, and underneath the little hamburger drop down, there's send support bundle, and it packages everything up and sends it off to support so they can immediately start getting to work on whatever the issue may be if that happens. With that said, we'll move right on to the on-demand versus pilot light. So this discussion comes up a little bit what's best for the business. And with on-demand, it definitely is optimized for your total cost of ownership. So it definitely is cheaper because we don't spin up a server or a host unless we need to test or do a DR event. So it's a pay-as-you-go kind of model. So there's definitely a cost savings there. The little bit of the double-edged sword there is your RTO is a little bit higher because you have to spin up a on-demand host when a DR situation or a test is required. And this can take about 90 minutes or more, depending on how many hosts you are spinning up in your software-defined data center. So there's definitely some time involved there. And then also, because it is on demand and we can tear it down and spin it up as required, every time it's spun up, it's a brand new software-defined data center. So there's going to be some extra settings that you're going to have to either re-import or set up. So your firewall rules, some of your how you want your network to look like, those sorts of things. But definitely has some cost benefits to it. Where the pilot light, is kind of the reverse, where it has the lowest recovery time objective, because you always have 2 hosts or more sitting there, and it's ready to go. So tests can be done whenever you like. Failover and failbacks can be done whenever you like. Some of our users also use this when they have a pilot light for applications that have high availability built into them. So SQL Always On is a good example of this, where you can replicate, as long as you have something running on the other side, and then you just don't need to have to include that into your protection groups or your TR plans. So there's pros and cons to both, and it really comes down to what's best for the business and what fits your your TCO and your RTO from a recovery times perspective. With that said, the on-demand setup it is very popular, but there is some foundational work that needs to be done up front. And essentially what happens for on-demand, because we spin up the servers as they're needed, we essentially just have to lay the foundation or groundwork for that. So what we do there is we get your VMware account and your AWS account set up, and then we link the two and get the original CIDRs and networking stood up so that essentially it's ready to accept a new software-defined data center when that time comes. So what that looks like is you would just go through a normal VMC deployment, and step 2, there's going to be this little button here in red that says open AWS console and run a CloudFormation template. And what that template's going to do is when it's done running, it's just going to link the 2 accounts together, and it's just going to have all the networking stood up for the hosts. So that when you do need to spin up a host, that can be done very quickly. And you don't have to look, if you don't want to, at the VMC console or the AWS console anymore. That everything can be done directly out of the VCDR UI if you like, but we don't restrict you. If you still want to deploy it the manual way, VCR is more than happy to accept that. Jumping forward into creating DR plans, so whether it's a pilot light or a on-demand, once you have your recovery SDDC spun up and running, the next step is to create your DR plan and to do your mapping. So essentially, when you go to create a DR plan, it's going to ask you what protection group do you want to restore, and then it's going to ask you for all the mapping. So it's going to say what virtual center do you want to map, what compute resources do you want to map, folders, network, and storage. So here you can see I have one virtual machine in this particular use case, and it's currently living in cluster 1, and I'm just mapping it to compute resource pool. Now, something that VCDR does that's really handy is any virtual machines that are in your protection group that it's trying to map, it's going to highlight where they live. So this little cluster 1 is actually a slightly different blue color than the rest of the black text. So as you scroll down, you can usually find where those systems are living. Now, we do need a one-to-one mapping here. And what I mean by this is, in this case, we only had one virtual machine living in cluster 1, and I mapped it to compute resource pool. But if I had another VM running in cluster 2, I could not map it to compute resource pool. And the reason for that is we don't track a one-to-many. So when we do the failback plan, we need to know exactly where it came from so we can put it back to where it originally was. So that's the reason for the one-to-one relationship, but there's lots of different ways to get around that. You can create as many folders or resource pools or networks that you want to get around it. So this is a perfect example here where I had a protection group that had 2 virtual machines. One was living in the app network, and one was living in the web network. The app network I mapped to SDDC CGW network 1. And then I went to go try and map the VM that lives in the web network to the exact same network. Now, usually you wouldn't do this anyways because the IPs and subnets are probably different, but in the event that they were on the same large VLAN or something, it's going to give you an error because again, we need to do a one-to-one mapping. So, I go and select another network and it's going to let me proceed. So again, from the recovery SDDC's perspective, we can create whatever kind of networks or switches that we need to match those network settings and to get that running on the other side. The next step, of course, as you work through the DR plan, you can see here on the left, it's going to ask your virtual centers, folders, compute resources, virtual networks. If you want to do IP changes, it does have a system baked in for that you can use. We do also have a scripting VM that we can leverage if there's any kind of automation you want to do that's not built into the product. But one of the last steps here is the recovery steps, which is if you want VMs to come up in a specific order. So what you would do in this case is, let's say we had 4 virtual machines and they were Active Directory, a database server, a web server, and an application server. And we wanted them to come up in a specific order. We could go and create these rules, select the virtual machines and tell them to power on. And then once we've created the rule, it looks like this. And the recovery steps are just drag and drop. So if I had 2 or 3 more of them, they would just list them 1, 2, and 3. The last rule is always recover all remaining VMs, files, and groups. And what this means is, in this case, I picked out one virtual machine out of my protection group, which was test win01. And what's going to happen is there's another virtual machine still left in the group. So when it gets to step 2, it's just going to recover anything else I haven't picked out. It's not going to recover test win twice. It knows I've picked it out, but anything remaining in the protection group, it is going to restore at that point. A critical tip here is you cannot remove this, number 2. So if you want to kind of cherry pick out one virtual machine and not restore anything else, you would have to create a protection group just with that virtual machine. You have to restore everything that is in that protection group. You can pick the order, but you can't say, no, just don't do these 1 or 2 VMs. So that's very important when you're selecting your or creating your protection groups and running your DR plans and thinking about how that recovery process is going to work. The next step here is test versus failover. So there's a couple kind of differences here. So test plan essentially is non-disruptive. So what a test plan is going to do is it's going to restore the virtual machines from the cloud storage into the recovery SDDC and spin them up, and you can log into them, see if the data is there, poke around, and then when you're done, it deletes everything. It doesn't power off the virtual machine on the primary site. So it's exactly as it says, it's a test plan. With that said, there's a checkmark box when you're doing your mappings in the DR plan that says map the same for test and failover. If you want your test plan to go into a different like mapping, so different resource pool, folder, or network, you can change that. It's just you uncheck that box and then it lets you set a different mapping for test plan. And the reason why this is important is because if you select a network and it is routed, when it restores that virtual machine in that test plan, it's going in that network. So things like, if you don't want Active Directory to replicate back or anything like that, you may want to create like an isolated network that they can restore into so that you don't cause yourself any problems with the test plan. And what these are good for is if the company has a policy that just says, we just need to test to make sure the data is good. We fire up the virtual machine and we can see the data and we're good with that. If, however, you have a policy in the company that it says we have to do a full failover test, once a year or once a quarter or something like that, that's when you'd want to run a failover. Now, the failover is actually designed for a failover. It's going to think that your protected site is down, but it won't power off virtual machines on the protected site until you do the failback. So that's important to know as well if you're doing testing with like a full failover scenario. But those are the big two differences. The only difference between the two as well is right now the test plan does allow you to select which storage subsystem the VMs run out of. And the failover does not, but that feature is coming in the future. So you can see here when you go into a test plan, this option won't be in the failover. It asks you, where do you want the virtual machines to run? Do you want them to storage vMotion over to the recoveries SDDC vSAN storage, or do you just want to leave them running in the cloud NFS storage? So obviously there's some large benefits with this when this feature does come out. So virtual machines that don't require thousands upon thousands of IOPS can just live in the cloud storage and run from there, which means it require less vSAN nodes to run your entire environment. But if you're poking around today, you're only going to see that feature in the test plan today. So one of our final topics here is the DR failover steps. So essentially, when you do a failover, the failover is essentially 4 steps, and what it's going to do when you execute it is it's going to prep the cloud storage. It's then going to restore all the virtual machines in your protection group to the recovery site, and it's going to deactivate your protection group. And what that means is we're just going to pause the schedule so that we're not replicating data or trying to replicate data from the protection group in the event that the primary site is still up in some fashion. Then we're going to storage vMotion, the data from the cloud storage to the vSAN, and then we're going to release the hooks from the cloud storage, and your virtual machines are up and running and good to go. It's important to note that after step 2, the VMs are live. So they are powered up and running during the storage vMotion, but the storage vMotion can sometimes take a few minutes depending on how large the virtual machines are. The last question I get on this subject is commit and rollback. And I get a lot of questions on why is this here and what does it do? So essentially, if you were to hit the rollback button, it's almost like a test, right? It's just going to say, nope, I didn't want to do that. It was a mistake. It'll go and delete all the virtual machines that were stored in the recovery site, and on-prem will just continue to work as per normal. It's just in case, something didn't quite go right, or someone executed the DR plan accidentally, or so on and so forth. However, once you click commit, you no longer can roll back. It is committed. You are running in your recovery site. The other thing the commit button does is it will ask you if you want to create a failback plan. And if you click yes, it just flips the switch. So all those mappings that we did at the start of the DR plan, it flips them for a failback plan, so we can put the virtual machines back to where they were, once the protected site is back online. Moving to failover steps for the failback. Two things that comes up here a lot when I talk about this with customers is the nomenclature. You have to remember when you look at the steps here that we've flipped the script. So what is the protected site and the failback site are different now, because in the failover, the protected site was on-prem, the recovery site was the failover site. Now that we're failing back, it's reversed. The protected site is the DR recovery site, and the failback or failover is the on-prem site. So when you read through these steps and you look at that nomenclature, just keep that in mind. And essentially what we do here is there is 12 steps, so it is a little bit longer than the failover. And the reason for that is we prep the storage, and then we're going to go and check the on-prem site or the original protected site to see if the VMs are online. So if they are online, they're going to get powered off. Then we're going to check the change block tracking to see what new deltas have actually occurred while running in the recovery SDDC. Then we're going to power off the virtual machines and take a final snapshot and merge that all down into kind of like a master snapshot, which we will then merge down into the primary site or the protected site. And then you'll have all your new data. So what we usually do in a stage 7 VCDR deployment is we'll take like a little test Windows Server 2019 box, we'll fail it over, we'll put a bunch of text files on it, and then when we fail it back, you'll see that that server now has the text files on it when it's failed back to on-prem or to your protected site. And that's kind of what we're going through here on all these steps. The last piece to that is the commit button. You'll notice that there is no rollback. It's a one-way trip to get back. And the commit's the same thing. All the commit's going to do is it's going to ask you if you want to create another failback plan, which you don't need to, and it's going to deactivate this DR plan once it's finished doing its restore and cleaning up of everything. You'll also notice in step 11 and 12, it does do a cleanup. So when it does know that the on-prem or the protected site is restored successfully, it's going to go and clean up the SDDC. So there's no more virtual machines living in there, and you could do what you want with that SDDC. The last little bonus tip here is I've had this happen with a couple customers. When they click the commit on the failover, they forget to check to create a failback plan. If you do that, do not fret. We have a very handy dandy fix for this. If you click on your DR plan and you click duplicate, there's a little checkmark box that says reverse the protected and recovery site, and it'll actually create a failback plan for you. And all you have to do is select the data store that you want to put the protected group back into. So don't worry if you forget that step. We can easily reset that up for you. So we've gone over a lot, and now we'll kind of ask for your feedback here. I believe the moderators will have a feedback form or some kind of a poll, just to help us make this session better or find out more of what you're looking for. So that should be coming down, and then we have some time for questions. And then I think we have some great links for extra information and contact information for myself and Bilal. I'll give the moderators a couple seconds here for the feedback, and then we can move on to the next slide. Okay, I've been told we can go right into questions. Excellent. Okay, so with that said, any questions? I know we covered a lot, in a short period of time. Feel free to stick your hand up or pop into Q&A. I'm more than happy to answer any questions around VCDR, DR plans, anything like that. So we got first question. Once set, can a protection groups or other settings like mappings be changed on the fly? Yes, so disaster recovery plans and mappings can be changed whenever you want. You just edit the DR plan, change the mappings, so that can be changed on the fly. Protection groups can be changed or altered as well. The only thing I'd warn about protection groups is if you decide to delete a protection group, it's going to ask you if you want to delete all the snapshots. The only other thing about the protection groups is when you create them and it replicates up the first copy, that's going to be the biggest data transfer. After that, it essentially does like a never-ending incremental. So it's always just going to be passing up deltas. So if you add like a 700 gigabyte virtual machine, you'll see a larger transfer happen the first time. But you can edit the patterns for protection groups or DR plans on the fly. So we've got another question. When set, if we want to change the disk size of the VM hardware, do we need to delete and re-protect the VM or anything? So the protection group will take a new snapshot. It's usually looking for deltas. So it's going to, if you were to resize, is the question if you're making it bigger or smaller for the virtual machine? Bigger? Yeah, so bigger won't be an issue. It's going to see that delta and transfer the delta information. It may take a new snapshot because it's always in a never-ending incremental. So I can get a definitive answer for you, but it's either going to do another incremental and just treat that disk as such. It could do another snapshot because the disk size has changed. So I could check out for you for sure, but it is something you can do. Is there a way to automate the shutdown of the primary site when doing a full failover test? So we don't have something cooked into the UI to shut down the primary site because the VCDR assumes it's a failure. With that said, we do have a scripting VM. So if I go back into my pictures here, let me just find a slide. So if you look right here, that scripting VM. So if that scripting VM is running, all that VM is just a little virtual machine that has Python and PowerShell installed on it. And that allows you to script anything you like that isn't built into the UI. So you could theoretically essentially have a Python or a Power CLI script to essentially attach to the on-site virtual center and power all the virtual machines down. So you could do it that way, but unfortunately there isn't something cooked directly into the UI for that. Yeah, no problem. Go back through the slides here. If there's any other questions, feel free to ask. I'll give it a couple more seconds here while we're waiting to see if any more questions kind of percolate up. We will share some links here. So if the moderators want to copy those links into the chat, wealth of information here. We got all the text zone articles and how to set it up and how to change all the settings. The last link is the cloud, the VMware VCDR release notes. So any new future releases, information will be there. So for instance, when that storage selection option comes out, you'll see that in the release notes there. So if you're looking for kind of a specific feature to come out, that's where you'll see it. And with that said, obviously, if there's any questions, you don't like asking questions in a group or something comes to mind a day or two from now, always happy to answer questions either via email, LinkedIn, or Twitter. Same thing goes for my partner. He's not here to defend himself, so feel free to pick on Bilal. But we're both more than happy to answer questions and continue the conversation if anything comes up. I don't know, how are we doing on time here? Let me take a look. Oh, we're 1 minute over. So I guess I'll put one last helpline out there. Any other questions? Or if not, we can keep this thing on time and get everyone back to their next meetings on time. Well, I appreciate everyone joining this session. and taking the time to come to this tips and tricks and to listen to the session. If anything comes to mind, please reach out, and more than happy to have discussions or help with that. And also thank you for all the feedback and pools. This will help us create other sections. So networking is very important, and some more of the, like a 200 or 300 level on how the bits and pieces work. So maybe that's something we'll work on for the next month.